Okay, now I'm going to talk about the concept of genetic algorithms. Everyone's ears kind of go, whoa, genetic algorithms. It's not that hard, actually, as they apply towards artificial intelligence. If I were to talk about genetic algorithms for DNA analysis, totally different, a little bit harder. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve this problem, and the problem we're going to solve is the traveling salesperson problem. And this is your assignment number 2. So just keep that in mind. So you're going to implement a genetic algorithm to find a solution to the traveling salesperson problem for the following distance matrix. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, well, all the way up to 15. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 15. So it's a 15 by 15 grid showing the distances between city 1 and city 1, city 2 and city 1, city 3 and city 1. So city 2 here and city 1 is 1. So if you look at the instructions on the bottom, it says there's 15 cities, 1 through 15, 1 through 15. The distances from city 1 to city 1 is nothing. It's 0 because you're in city 1. So if you're in city 1 and you're going to travel to city 1, you're not going anywhere. Distance is 0. If you're in the distances between city 2 here and city 1 is 1. And the distance between city 3 and city 1 is 10. And what is 10 and what is 1? Think of them as, if you want, miles, kilometers, distance ratios. It's just a number representing the distance between the two cities. So you're going to write an algorithm in pseudocode, any format of pseudocode that you like. You can use the pseudocode examples that I've given you in the lecture so far, or the ones in the textbook, or anything you're familiar with. Do not write source code for this. Write pseudocode. And I'm going to show you how to do the pseudocode in a few minutes, actually, when we go through the lecture. Any notation that you want. What you want to do here, in any notation that you want, the pseudocode is going to find the shortest route to take between the cities. So you do not need to implement the algorithm in a programming language. You just define and describe a solution to the traveling salesperson problem using the information in the chart that gives you the shortest route taken to travel through 15 cities in the shortest amount of time. Sounds pretty easy. That's the entire assignment. So what you're going to turn in, you don't have to repeat all this stuff. You don't have to repeat the route. But give me the shortest route you found and give me the order of the cities that you're going to travel through to come to the shortest route. So I'm going to leave this up, and then I'm going to talk about the solution to this problem. So you could probably do it in 5 minutes after the lecture is over with, hopefully. We'll see what happens. So in order to figure out the solution to the problem, we have to know something about genetic algorithms. So what is a genetic algorithm? What are they? Evolutionary algorithms that make use of operations like mutation, recombinations, and selections. So what we have is 15 cities by 15 cities, or combinations of cities. So we can go from city 2 to city 1, city 3 to city 2, and if we're at 2, we're going to 1. And we have all these different combinations to visit in a set of 15, because we're going to 15 cities. So if we start at city 1 and we're in city 1, we've already taken care of city 1. And from city 1, now we want to go to city 2. We could travel through the cities, city 1, city 2, city 3, in order to city 15, but we'll have some backtracking because of the way that the layout is between the cities. So we might want to go city 1 to city 3, to city 6, to city 7, to city 10, to city 1 or 2. So think about the orders between the cities. So the uses here is to figure out, and we're going to use a genetic algorithm solution because, as you know, the traveling salesperson implementation as a search solution, way too complicated. The big O notation is way too high. The efficiency is very high. Very low. It's not a very efficient way in terms of a searching space. So we can come up with an optimization to the problem solution, and we can use machine learning and adaptive rules, and we can apply a bunch of artificial intelligence solutions to solve the problem. So the theory of evolution is taken into consideration. So every organism has unique attributes that can be transmitted to its offsprings, and so people evolve, and we have this thing called the strongest and the fittest that survive in terms of generations. So offsprings are unique if they have attributes from their parents. So we have selective breeding that can be used to manage changes from one generation to the next. It's a highly controversial concept actually in the U.S. because people go, well, what about natural selection? Why do we have to do selective breeding? And then we're going to, artificially create generations of people that all have characteristics that are going to be more intelligent, stronger, faster, or whatever it happens to be. And which has been the scientific kind of thing that's been going on for years. So nature applies certain pressures that cause individuals to evolve over time. And certain people and generations have evolved, and some, diseases have wiped out races of people. And, it's kind of the whole genetic process in terms of evolution. So in terms of the evolutionary pressures, what we see are from the environment. So creatures must work to survive by finding resources like food and water. So some animals through time have evolved, and some have become extinct from, being eaten by other animals or being somehow weeded out. So going back to, I believe, day 1 or day 2, when I talked about the soccer, finding from amongst all you people here, finding the people that would make the best soccer team. Well, then I could run you through a series of tests, and I could test your abilities and see, well, how fast do you run? Can you kick a ball? Can you see? And the interesting thing is I can weed out and find the best soccer player here using those criteria, or I can find a group. And then I could take and do natural selection to breed or to create other groups of soccer players from my selections. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking characteristics from a very generic fashion. So what you'll be doing is taking characteristics of the distances between the cities to figure out, well, which is the best route that I can take in terms of the problem solving. So that's kind of the thinking that you're looking at, and there's competition among all the different alternatives. So if you take the 15 by 15 grid and you map it out, an easy way of actually calculating this out would be taking from combination to combination and adding up the total of the combination. So if I took from 1 through 15 and I just did it in the order of going from city 1 to city 2 to city 3 to city 4, that's going to yield a certain distance. And then if I flip the combinations around, I'm going to yield another distance and then yet another distance, depending upon the total time it's going to take me to go from city 1 to city 2 to city 3. So among the competitions, in our criteria, we're looking at distance. And what we want is the shortest route because we don't want to travel too many miles and waste too much gas. Among other competitions for the soccer, it's going to be who can kick a ball, who can run, who's got the cardiovascular strength, stuff like that. Among a generic evolutionary process, some of the competition might be, creatures within the same species competing with each other on similar tasks to accomplish something. So in evolution, the animals that were bigger, stronger, that ate other animals, well, it depends on the volume of those animals as to who's being consumed, as to who's going to last. Hunters and gatherers, people who couldn't, the weak don't last, the strong survive. We also have rivalry, where people compete amongst themselves and then they extinct themselves. As an example, if we do the the island thing where Survivor, where people vote each other off the island, you're going to get the best survivor by other people weeding themselves out, which would fall into this category. And we have different species that affect each other by direct confrontation, hunting, indirectly by fighting for the same resource. They hunt each other out. In fact, that's what happens in regular schools when you have a curve system. Some people will give other people an F by knowing more, and they'll get an A, and the other people will fail because they might know more than the average, but they don't know as much as the best person in the class. And if that's the case, that's why I don't like curves, actually. If that's the case, some people who would probably normally get a B or a C would end up with an F because the ratio percentage between what they know and what the best person knows isn't good enough. It doesn't fall in the right category, which is really natural selection. We naturally select, with a curve, we naturally select the best people in the class and we give them an A. Everybody else doesn't do as well. So in terms of natural selection, creatures are not as good as the competing tasks like hunting, have fewer chances of having offspring in natural selection in the real world, and they have a fewer chance of surviving. So if we were doing natural selection on our distances of our traveling salesperson problem, we're going to throw out anything past a certain number. And we're going to say, well, because you can't actually go. In fact, this is kind of what we do naturally when we decide we're going to go from point A to point B. We're not going to go backwards. We're going to move forward. So we're naturally going to select, remove all possible solutions that are going to take us in the wrong direction. So that automatically gets wiped off the map. And then we only have a couple of streets to choose from. And then the streets that we're going to choose from are going to have a score that's associated with them if we've thought ahead and calculated everything out. We're going to have options we're going to take. And then amongst those options, we can change on the fly and make alternative choices. Those would be considered mutations. We can mutate our map once we understand things, and we can try different things. So in mutation, which is a basic genetic technique to put in non-predictability. So as an example, if we took the map and mapped it all out, drew a graph of it, measured all the cities, we could easily find the best path. But in a mutated environment, we could take in consideration traffic conditions. What if the distances are changing? What if there's obstacles, roads that don't, complete? Maybe there is no complete path between this city and this city in terms of our routes, and we can't get there. We have to go through a different connection. So it's not quite as calculated. Mutation allows us to kind of put in variables that are sort of outside of the box, outside of this. So we mutate humans actually to see what would happen if we combine this and this and this to see from a genetic point of view, maybe that'll create a stronger human, or maybe that'll create a stronger gene or something that's going to pull a little bit more weight, or that's going to do something differently. So back to the natural selection concept, the creatures are successful in completing basic tasks, more likely to transmit their attributes to the next generation. So the best tasks, and that's a definition of what are you considering the best tasks in the best generation. Well, in nature, those are the ones who are going to survive, the ones who are going to get food, water, the basic necessities. And so more creatures are born that can survive and pass these attributes. If we kill off the old ones and we keep the good ones, then those are the ones who are going to survive. So this is the total opposite of what we teach children actually today, because, in the United States, everybody wins. There's no such thing as a loser. Because parents thought, it doesn't give them much self-confidence if they lose. The problem is, and they don't know natural selection. So people win, people lose, people pass, people fail. So in genetic algorithms, that's how you make the selection. So if you don't have that, you don't enforce that in a society, then you got a bunch of people who don't know how to compete. So yeah, they have a lot of self-confidence and they like themselves, but they can't compete because they don't know how good they are or how bad they are, so they don't know what they need to work on. Which is kind of interesting. So it's been played along. The concepts have been played around with from psychology point of view and philosophy for many years. In terms of genetics, I'm going to give you some vocabulary to look at, because what ends up happening is when you start reading the research on this, you get hit with all these vocabularies, and you go, what's a genome? What's a genomics and alleles and all the genotypes and all these other little things. And you don't actually have to worry about it in terms of your problem solution. This is just the terminology that's been used and will continue to be used in literature. So when you read solutions, these are some of the categories and some of the classes and sort of the identification technique of the process. So we have the class. Well, you have a class. You have the class of sequences of something, a characteristic that you're measuring. So you're measuring cities. So the sequence of genes describes the overall structure of the genetics of a particular species. In your class, you've got cities with distances, traveling distances that go between them. You also have genomics, which is the study of the meaning of the genes of a particular species. So you could measure different characteristics like running, kicking, distances. Depends on what you're looking at in terms of what you're going to be measuring and what the meaning of those genes and combinations are going to be. What you want are the most characteristics as possible. If you limit your identification to a particular class and you say, I'm looking at the human and I'm only looking at the human's ability to run, then I've limited the scope of my problem solution. Probably too much, because just because you can run doesn't necessarily mean you can jump or you can do other activities. So this is really giving us our problem space in terms of artificial intelligence solutions. We also have the values that can be assigned to a given gene or alleles. So we have the ability to say, well, distance between city A and city B is 5 or 1 or 2. So this is basically our data that we're using for our analysis. So it's the values. And then we have the instances or the sequences of values that we're going to come up with. And you're probably going to just string them out in a list and go city 5, city 1, city 12, city 15. And given the particular order, in fact, you could probably program it into a scheme function, actually. Put all the cities in there with all the distances in one list and in the other list. Cross the distances, so when the total of all of the distances added up, because you have to think you have to go backtrack. If you're going down one, if you're going to visit all the cities, then you might have to go, and if one is farther away than the other, then you might actually have to backtrack, which is going to add to your time. So if you had a recursive function, it said, well, you can only go from this city to this city to this city, depending upon how you've mapped it out. Then your solution is going to be different. And your times are going to be different depending upon all the different maps. So you could put this into a scheme program, probably, actually, and use a recursive function to figure it out that way. But would it come up with an answer? Probably not. I don't know. It depends. I don't know if the problem is even solvable, actually, which is kind of another interesting question. But in essence, you could also figure it out through using the concepts of coming up with lists of values and the sequences that are going to lead to the solution. And genetically, it's going to come up much faster, actually. So we have physical properties. These are the phonetics. So we have the study of the physical properties or the morphology of the creatures that are independent of the genetic information that we're looking at. So we can look at, if we're looking at humans, we can look at the physical properties, or animals or something, or cities. We can actually create physical properties of non-physical existences as well. You know, the cities might be weather-related. The physical property might be related to road conditions, traffic, population, how busy is the place, Orphonyms, which are essentially the general structure of the creature of the body and the attributes. We can also look at them. Or the types, the phenotypes, which is going to be the same as the genotypes from a genetic point of view to a physical property point of view. The terminology is just slightly altered with the wording. So we're looking at the particular instances, realizing some of what makes a creature unique versus not unique. And then the product of the environment forces all added up together to give us our solution. So then we have what's called the conversions. Well, it's nice to take all the data, but we have to convert it somehow into some sort of way that we can formulate a solution to the problem using it as data or knowledge representation. So in the real world, this would be mapping between the genotypes and the phenotypes, which is kind of a hard thing to do. Taking the physical characteristics and the gene characteristics and mapping it so that you can put a quantitative number or a label on the characteristics and the associations. So in AI, the work is done by defining convenient functions or even designing and coding by hand to kind of translate what it is we're trying to measure with the physical and the kind of genetic properties that we're looking at. So it's kind of made up. That's how we get the numbers. This is the numbers I'm talking about, actually. It's the conversion of the genetic data to a 1, to a 10, to a 5, which is going to be something we can measure. So it's often easier to adapt genetic operators to work with environment data structures that are used to represent phenotypes or physical types that include or decode phenotypes. So to look at something in terms of genetic operators, to define it in terms of the knowledge representation, quantify it, essentially, is what we're doing with the starveling salesperson problem. We're just putting numbers or quantities on it. So here's the process. To find a potential solution to the problem. So potential solutions for problem domains are encoded by using machine representation, bit streams. Take all the numbers of all the distances and measure them out, write them out in a bit stream, and then take the bit stream and translate the bit stream, which is another way of doing it, which is what you're going to do if you're looking at gene types and you're looking at information that's data associated with a string of genes. It's a string of bits. So normally you see it on like CSI shows and stuff. It's usually like in some sort of a weird spreadsheet. You've got all the gene information all patterned out, and it's translated to bits, and then you can manipulate the bits to see the patterns, and you can see the particular footprint of the person, actually. And then you can compare genetic footprints between different species. You can kind of say, well, these are the same. So then you don't know if they're the same. It's not a 100% match. It's going to be a likelihood of there being a match. And if there is, you know that this person's blood is that person's blood over there, which is that person's blood over there. And you're just looking at the patterns, and you're analyzing the bit streams that are associated with the data. That's a very simplified approach to the problem, which is what you're kind of sort of doing with the traveling salesperson. You're looking at the patterns of the distances and the characteristics that are associated with going from one city to another city. And you're going to measure that against an optimal solution, if you can find the optimal solution. And then you know the correct path that you're going to take. So anyway, in the real world, going back to genetic algorithmic processes here, mating and mutation operations produce new generations of solutions from parent encodings. So they're new combinations. So we're mimicking kind of like what happens in the real world with a computer science solution to a traveling salesperson problem, essentially. So fitness function judges the individuals that are best suited, the most appropriate problem solving for survival. So that's how evolution is actually, if you look at the evolutionary literature in terms of man coming from a caveman to man today, we don't have tails anymore. We have 5 fingers. I don't know. I don't follow any of the evolutionary stuff, but long story short, we've mutated because the characteristics of us have evolved to whatever is adapting to our current environment, which is how that mutation sort of fits into the concept. And it works with computer science and artificial intelligent problem-solving solutions as well. So the first thing to do, and we're going to start out with a problem solution right now. We have the initialization, this starting set of values. That's what I'm giving you in the assignment. So the matrix that you've got is the initial information that you've received about the problem solution, and what it is, it's the distances between the cities. So initial population must be represented by a sample of the search space. There's your sample. It's just between those 15 cities. And then you have random initialization. It could be a good idea if the sample is too large. So if we take the entire world in terms of the search space, too big. So we could take the population of ITU students if we were looking at people. Kind of give us kind of a subset of the big space. We don't have to subset our traveling salesperson. It's pretty small. It's only a 15 by 15 matching. And if there's no space, in fact, you'll see when I go back to that, if you look at the matrix, sometimes there's no connection between the cities, so it's not possible. So there's no number in that matrix. So we can take a random sampling, or we can do a random generation, number generation, but cannot be biased if we do it randomly. If we do a natural selection, if we do an unrandom selection, for example, if we take the ITU student population, we fix the data set. Because you guys are mostly international students, you're not probably going to represent the typical San Jose resident. And if we're measuring for San Jose resident, we're not going to get it in terms of the sample set. So better to take a random sampling of the entire United States. So you need to know who are the people that are here on Saturday or Sunday. These are the people that are here. So the random is a much better approach. So random numbers generator cannot be biased, hopefully, and can reuse or seed populations with existing genotypes as well, based on algorithms or expert opinions of previous evolutionary cycles. So we could cycle through, take a random set, then come to take another random set, take another random set, and then cross the sets. And when you're seeding it, you're taking part of this set and part of that set, and you're putting it together. You're combining the sets. It makes the data cleaner, actually, because you're taking into consideration all of the different possibilities. And then we have the evaluation. So we take and then we run the evaluation. So each member of the population can be seen as a candidate solution to the problem. So let's go back to we're looking for soccer players. And I take the people sitting in this room as my sample. And I want to find the best soccer player. I want to find the characteristics that are associated with the best soccer player. So then I put you around a track, and then I see how fast you can run. But it's nighttime. It's dark outside. So then I realize that the group that has come back, that has finished the fastest, isn't the strongest group. And this is the problem we have in the evaluation. So we have to figure out, well, what criteria are we looking at? It's dark outside, so the people who have come back the fastest are blind. Because they have the better ability to sense where they are on the course. The people who aren't blind, who are faster, can't see where they're going. So they never finish, they don't come back. So then I go, oh, well then there's something wrong with my evaluation. So then I have to look at, well, what am I actually measuring? And that's the biggest problem with genetic algorithms. You come back and you say, well, this is the group. No, there's not. That's the wrong group. Because you didn't consider this characteristic or this gene type that fit into this as well. So the evaluation is probably the most important characteristic. So the fitness function determines the quality of each one of the solutions. So if your fitness function is taking people that run the fastest and you're not considering the fact that it's dark outside and you're making them run around a track in the dark, and the people who can't see, the blind people, can actually navigate themselves better in the dark than the people who can see, then your entire fitness function, your quality of your evaluation and your solution is totally wrong. It's bad quality. So fitness function takes on the phenotypes and returns a floating point number as its scope in this particular, as its score in this particular value. You'll put a score. Your score is going to be the shortest distance. But is it the shortest distance, and is it possible? You know, if you have zeros in there because there is no connection between this city and this city, you have to go through this city in order to get to this city, then that's a bad solution because the route's impossible. So it's not a problem dependent on problem dependent. So it can be very simple, hopefully. It can also be a bottleneck if it's not carefully thought out. So there's our magic ways to create them. So there is no magic way, but there are magic ways to create solutions and evaluations, but they come out with bad data sometimes. So then we have the selection process. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know how many rounds we're going to go through to find the best soccer player. So round number 1, and then we select out. We take all the people who didn't make it around the track, or who made it around the track, and then we select better ones. So you want to give preferences to the better individuals by adding them to the mating pool. So you mix the best people out of this group with the best people out of that group, and you put them together. And then you see, well, what is that going to produce? So the entire population ends up being selected from many selected. May be desirable to conduct a tournament in order to order the individuals in the population. So if the entire population is selected, then you either have to find a better selection or you order the selection. You take the top 10, the top 15 to make your search space smaller. You're going to consider everybody, and your first pass will probably be all the cities that are possible. Your worst case scenario is a route that makes sense, that's completable, but maybe it has probably the highest time it takes because you're backtracking, but you're only going to select the possible routes, maybe out of the first iteration. So you'd like to keep the best in the mating pool and then drop the worst. This is the elitism kind of concept in society. Elitism is a trade-off with the search space completeness, actually, because you're selecting the base, you're selecting the best that you have, but you haven't selected everybody. You haven't pulled the entire population. You've only pulled a percentage of the population, and you're only keeping a best of those percentages of the population. So there's probably somebody in there who you didn't select for the sample group, who's probably better than everybody in the best group, the best selection of the sample group that you selected, which is one of the problems. So then you do a crossover. So you take multiple groups, select the best, and then cross them. And you cross them. This is basically in regular human reproduction. The codes for both the parents are combined to create the offspring. Well, then you take this group over here that's good at running, and this group over here that's good at kicking. You cross them together, and you get the product of the two of them in combinations. And you say, well, which ones are going to have the best combinations? Because you don't necessarily know yet. And then in sexual crossover, there has no impact on the mating pool. In other situations, it might have an impact because you don't necessarily know which groups you're going to cross. So you'd like to keep a 60-40 split between the parent contributions, 95-5 split negates the benefits of the crossover. So you want to make sure you can get like a 50, not really a 50-50, because 50-50 is predictable. If you take and cross all the good runners with all the good kickers, you're just going to get the combination of the two of them together. So if you cross them unevenly, but you cross them balanced, so not a 95-5, but a 60-40 kind of split or a 70-30 kind of split, then you can get the cross with a little bit slightly not optimal, what you think is optimal combination, which is going to give you more predictable, less predictable, but yet more interesting combinations that come out of that. So if you have a selected two strings here, and string A and string B, this is an example of putting this with numbers, because you can cross your cities. So you take the two paths, come up with a couple of paths that make sense, then cross the paths. And when you cross the paths, you get different combinations, more combinations than what you originally thought of. And the more combinations are going to lead you closer, in theory, are going to lead you closer to the final best combination. Because with each one of the crosses, you're going to select the best ones out of the crosses. So it's like taking humans and cross-mating them and then figuring out, well, we want people, if you're German back in the 1950s or so, we want people with blonde hair and blue eyes. So we're going to cross certain generations of people with certain other generations to create characteristics in humans and then toss out the other ones. He did natural selection actually with the Jews, actually, but yeah, with races of people, he did his own natural selection. Kind of the same concept, by keeping different races and crossbreeding the different races to make combinations that were suited for what he was wanting, whatever. But for cities, you're going to take all the different combinations of all the different ways you can go, cross it with alternative, different combinations, take the combinations, cross themselves, and then you can come out with, well, what if I did this and made 3 U-turns and, went back to this city twice and this city 5 times? I can still get there faster. I can still visit everything. Because, if you think about the combinations of the way the cities might be related to each other, all we know are the distances. So we don't necessarily know how many times we have to visit each one of these little cities to make sure we get to all of them. So what if you're in a cul-de-sac, or, it's kind of like a circle? You might have to, go through a couple of circles in the map, which you're not going to find easily unless you kind of cross over different combinations. Anyway, long story short, let's go back into the crossover example. If A is a bunch of 1s and B is a bunch of 0s, we might choose a uninformally randomly site. So we have a position number 3 and then trade bits. So the crossover is not uniform. It is not predicted. It's just random. We're going to say, let's take the third one and cross it over. So you could line up all your city combinations and then just start blending. Okay, every third one, swap it with each other, and just rotate all of the numbers a little bit. So you see that actually when you do crossovers, when you see those numbers that come down and then all of a sudden the numbers go back up and it switches around. That's a crossover matrix where they're they use it in movies all the time because it kind of creates a nice effect. And then after they cross it over for a while, and then it shows the credits. You can see the person's name. It's kind of a cool kind of way of doing it. If you imagine that, that's what this is doing actually. It's taking certain bits in certain positions and just moving them up or moving them down in terms of the columns so that you can see what it's going to spell or see what it's going to change with. And you might come out with something, who knows. So this would create 2 new bit streams here, where if we took the third position and we crossed everything over here, so the first, what do we get here? Well, we got the last 2 that changed. So these guys here, if we kept the first 3, and at the position 3 we crossed it over, the 1s turned to 0s, the 0s turned to 1 on our cross. So now we have 2 new strings that are completely different, that are the crossed on the third position. So the new strings might then be added to the mating pool if they are fit. So after we cross it, and this is the key, after you cross your cities, then make sure that the cities are still good. It still completes the route. Because the concept is you want to complete the route. If you've got incomplete routes that are not possible, that end up with low scores, great, but they're not possible. It's not a solution to the problem. So you have to check each one of the iterations that you go through with the crosses to make sure that your cities are still possible. It's kind of like how people randomly guess stuff. You know, they just flip a coin, or you know, then they make decisions that way actually. But you know, what you're doing with a crossover is you're just considering all the different combinations in sort of an ununiform, random kind of way of doing it. If you do it with a calculated algorithm that you're going to program, it's going to take you too long because the search space is too big, and the crosses are, you know, just make all the different combinations you possibly could. You know, put it through a computer, wait for like 5 or 6 hours, maybe, and get an answer out of that. So doing it genetically, you're kind of doing it faster. Then we have mutation, which is what we kind of do with humans too. Mutate. How do we mutate? Well, we've actually mutated ourselves. We have, throughout the years, have gotten different gene characteristics given our environmental factors. And we've mutated in populations. Some people who live in certain countries are colder or warmer, or you know, their body temperatures adjust to different climates, and they're used to that stuff because they have adapted through mutation, through the gene selection. Because weaker genes are going to get thrown out, and stronger genes are going to maintain, which is how we lost our tails from being a caveman to being upright humans. If you follow the evolutionary, we've mutated as a race. So we're going to do the same thing with our data set for the traveling salesperson people. So if we know we're not going to hit a city, there's only one way to hit a particular city, then we're only going to hit it a certain way. So we can fix it. And then we can alter everything else randomly. Just say, hey, you know what, just leave that alone and move this. Or we say, for every one of those combinations, change it. So it's always going to go to this city first. Because, you know, to go to city 1 to city 1, we can just naturally mutate that one and just say, there's no city 1 anymore. We're going to start with city 2 now. Because we can randomly just say that that's going to be, and then the ending pretty much might be given as well, depending upon the combinations we've decided to mutate. So mutation happens when we have gene levels that are rarely and not good, and genotype levels that are better for the genetic algorithm process. And we pick and we put the better ones in there. And so we make stronger selections by, you know, basically by priority. So mutation is important for maintaining diversity in the gene code, so we can add new combinations. In humans, mutation was responsible for the evolution of intelligence, according to some of the evolutionary people. That's how we got smart, from mutation. Not to say that the caveman wasn't smart. Who knows? That's a philosophical conversation in itself. An example here, the occasional low probability alteration of a bit position in a string. So randomly mutating by changing bit positions, perhaps. So then we have the operators. The operators. There's the selection and the mutation. Selection, crossover, mutation. The operators are what we're applying. So if we were to write this in pseudocode, we'd have our data set, or our selection. We'd have our process of determining the best fit. We'd have our crossover, perhaps, or we could just do a selection and a mutation. You might want to, you know, write it just so it does a mutation and no crossover, or a selection or crossover and a mutation. So in a selection, mutation is used when you use together, gives us the genetic algorithm equivalence to the parallel noise tolerance hill climbing algorithm. Haven't talked about hill climbing yet, but I'm going to hit that probably in the afternoon. But it's noise tolerant, which means it can, in terms of it can bypass out things that don't belong, random data that might not be applicable for the solution. In terms of the selection, crossover, and mutation, it provides insurance policy against losing population diversity and avoiding some of the pitfalls of the ordinary hill climbing. So it makes it a little bit easier because we're doing crossover, which is more predictable in terms of keeping the best fit selections that we're looking with. And we have replacements. So we can replace different combinations, which is similar to mutation in concept, where we're taking the solution, where we're replacing it with something that's better, and we're getting rid of the stuff that we don't like. So determining when to insert new offspring into a mating pool and which individuals to drop out based on the fitness score, which is the replacement. That's if I took this entire group, ran you around a track, and then, you know, took another group, ran you around a track, took another group, ran you around a track, and then took and replaced the original population set with all the best fits out of all three groups. That would be a replacement. which basically would say if we took the top five solutions and we only went to 5 different combinations of cities, and maybe we did 10, and we took the top 5 out of it and we made that our selection group, that would be a replacement as well. So steady state evolution calls for the same number of individuals in the population, so each new offspring processed one at a time. So the fit individuals are remain as long as they can, and we get rid of the older ones. We get rid of the non-fit individuals. So in generational evolution, the offsprings are placed into new populations, and other offsprings from other generations are put together. So the genetic codes only survive in kids, actually. Because the older ones, well, actually that's what happens in genetic codes, actually. We only get survival of the ones that are going to be fit for the environment, So here is your genetic algorithm, and here's your pseudocode that you can do. So you can write it just like this. So here's slide number 18 of the genetic algorithm lecture. It's going to give you a hint of what you need to do for the assignment number 2 for the traveling salesperson. So you can set your time as equal to 0. And then you can calculate your time as you go through to see how long it's going to take you to get through all the cities. And what you want is the best route that gives you the shortest amount of time. So you initialize the population, which is going to be your distances between all the cities. While a termination condition is not met, evaluate the fitness of each one of the members based on your fitness criteria. Select members that are based on the fitness. Produce offspring or cross or mutations from the selected pairs. And replace the numbers with better offsprings or better route choices. And then set the time to time plus 1. And then go through again. So it's kind of a cycle where you go through the first set, second set, third set, fourth set. Who knows how many sets you're going to go through, but eventually you're going to find the optimal solution, and you're going to be left with one path, theoretically. You can write it up just like this if you want to. What you're doing is you're describing what you would do to apply a genetic approach from this overview that I'm giving you. So you don't have to be an expert on genetic algorithms to do this. Just in theory, how would you apply the approach to solve the problem? There's many different ways of doing it, actually. There's probably about at least 20 different ways of solving this problem, genetically, depending upon the criteria that you were looking at. So you have to really kind of think about it, to kind of think, well, why would I want to think it this way in terms of the solution? So why use genetic algorithms? Why do you want to think this way? So you can solve hard problems really easily. It's estimating guesswork is what it is. It's not applying a formula from computer science. It's not saying and finding the one, which is why people that don't like obscurity or don't like ambiguity hate this type of problem solving, because it's kind of like, how some people can just guess at stocks, and there's some genetic algorithms for it too, or people just are right on target because they're like genetically almost thinking about it in terms of either that solution or another technique. And then some people sit there with a pen and a calculator and come back an hour later and come up with it, and their guess might be slightly off, but they come up with a different type of guess because it's calculated. This is not calculated that way. This is a guess. This is an estimate from mutation, from crossover, from selection. So that's how I can take all of you guys, put you on a track, figure out who can run the fastest, and figure out who can, and this is how sports people do it. Some of the training that goes into selecting high school athletes. So, okay, who's the best person in here that can run the fastest? Okay, I'm going to make you a basketball player. Because, they know what characteristics meet the basketball criteria or the soccer or the swimming. Actually, tall skinny people are good swimmers. Some short people are good soccer players, stocky people. So, I don't know, there's like different characteristics for different body sizes and shapes. And then also previous experience. But it doesn't really matter, actually. This is the other interesting thing, is it doesn't really matter how long you've been playing a sport, whether or not you're going to be good at it or not. I mean, there's some learned skill, but most of it's genetic disposition. Are you able to do it from your characteristics? So you can look at this from a traveling salesperson perspective too. And you can probably visually see the answer by looking at all the data, by doing some really good guesstimate work on it. So, which is kind of like how a lot of people read maps. They look at the map and they go, oh, that looks shorter. And then they follow that route. Back when we used to have maps, now we have GPS. So, okay, so you can solve really hard problems quite easily without going through an exhaustive calculation that you do in traditional computer science. It's easy to interface genetic algorithms with existing solutions and models. They're very free form. They fit with a bunch of software as well. Genetic algorithms are extensible. Once you come up with the model that's working, you can extend it out to other data groups for other things and other techniques. And they're easily hybridized, so you can create a hybrid solution that uses both genetic algorithms along with traditional searching and sorting computer science algorithms. And they work by sampling, so you don't have to take the entire population. If I wanted to find the characteristics to make the best swimmer, I don't have to measure every single human on the earth. I can just take a sampling and then figure out from that sample and then apply it to everybody else to figure out, well, we don't have to test everybody. And so they can be detect differences in specified error rates depending upon the sample size, actually. Just like statistics, actually, the larger your sample size, normally the lower your error detection rate is. So you can use a little problem-specific code as well. So, in fact, your genetic algorithm for your traveling salesperson problem is using a very small, limited 15 cities by 15 cities in terms of your problem scope. So here, to give you even more help, is slide number 20 starts in with the solution to this. I'm not writing the pseudocode for you, so you're going to write it after you demonstrate. But you're writing it to demonstrate that you understand the concept in terms of the implementation. So use a genetic algorithm to solve the problem of the traveling salesperson. We can begin by creating a population of candidate solutions. So hint number one, you're going to create a population of candidate solutions. This is going to be all the combinations, maybe not all of them, but maybe a sampling of the combinations that would work with the combination of the cities. And then you need to define the mutation, the crossover, and the selection methods to aid in the evolving of the solution in this particular population. And then at random, pick two solutions and combine them together to create a child solution. Switch the orders around and see if it's any better. Then if the fitness score function is used to mark the solutions, use the fitness score function. So, and then you've got your solution. So for your crossovers, you might take two paths, path number one and path number two, break them arbitrary points, and define a new solution, such as the left plus the right plus the left. If you can come up with a couple of paths that work, you just take the first part of this path and the second part of this path and cross them. And then you have two new paths. And then you can take, maybe the first part of that one, the first part of that one, and cross it. How do you know if they're good? Add them all up. So each one of the paths is a hop from city to city to city. So you have a string of numbers. You add them up, it's going to equal something. You cross them, you have a new string of numbers. You add it up, you're finding the lowest number. The lowest completed path is what you're finding for that solution. You don't have to switch them like this. You can switch them any way you want. That's why I said there's like thousands of different combinations that you can come up with for this. For the mutation, you might randomly switch two cities in an existing path. Actually, just pick a city you like, number 5, and just randomly rotate it, switch it around, and you've created mutation. Not all your mutations are going to be good. It's kind of like human experimentation. Not all the mutations are good. Some of them actually cause some pretty bad diseases. But some of the mutations actually create more intelligence, or they create faster people, or they create something good. So evolve algorithm there's an algorithm that's actually out there that is for the traveling salesperson problem, actually. We set up, in terms of that particular solution, which is you're going to do something, but you're going to do your own, very similar to this. You set up the initial population to evolve it for G generations, create M mutations, and then add them to the population. So the population is constantly being changed by the mutations that you're adding, and those are going to be random city selections, perhaps. The subject mutations to the population constraints and determine their relative fitness, drop out the ones that don't stand up, that are weaker solutions, create C crossovers, and then add them to the population. This is pretty much a description of what you're doing. And then subject the crossovers to population constraints and determine their relative fitness. It's all about the fitness. And the fitness is the shortest distance. And here's some examples with some numbers. Slide number 23. And our steps are create a group of random tours. So solving it using another solution here is another example. Stored as a sequence of numbers or parents. That's what you have. You have a matrix I'm giving you with a sequence of numbers. Choose two of the best solutions. Combine and create two new sequences or new sequences. You can actually create more than two. Add them up, and then you've got your answer. Write this in pseudocode, by the way. Don't write it like this. Write it in, if I were going to implement this as an algorithm, think about how I'm going to do it. And then write the pseudocode up to describe what you're going to do. This is in words. This is in a box, a matrix box. And when it's sort of written in a pseudocode format. So here's a problem. We have city 1 repeated in child 1. City 5 is repeated in child 2. So we just repeat the children for our mutation as an example. So these are the two parents and these are the two children routes that come out of it. And two children routes are mutated from crossovers. Or there's crossover and some mutation that's applied to create the two children. Modifications needed. So the algorithm must not allow repeated cities. Well, okay, forget this. You don't have to worry about these modifications. This is for different. If you're actually going to cover a solution to the traveling salesperson problem, the traditional solution, no repeating cities. You can repeat cities all you want, actually. But it gets a lot more complicated when you can't repeat the cities. Also, the order must be considered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the same as, well, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4. It based upon the considerations. A computer model of n cities can be created. You don't have to do it on the computer. Don't do it on the computer models. So it gets quite detailed, actually. You don't have to create a computer model. So here's an example with parent A and parent B. And we see sort of the cities crossing over with A, B, C, D, A, B. And we have different combinations. We put them together and we get the combined paths of both, and we're going to select one. It's kind of like what we get with natural parent and child. So the child doesn't get everything, it gets one of each. Well, not necessarily one of each. Some kids actually get a lot more from one parent than the other parent, or they get combinations of the strongest gene pool. This is what happens with with the blue eyes and black eyes. Blue eyes don't survive. Huh?
You get brown eyes.
Brown eyes, but there's like, what is it, like a 1 in 10 chance or something? Or
If your grandparents have blue eyes.
if your grandparents have blue eyes, there's a likelihood that one of the children will have blue eyes, but not all of them. So yeah, but on the combinations we can pick it. We can essentially through research we figured that out from genetic combinations. So you're going to do this with the paths. You're going to pick one. So you're going to cross two paths and you're going to get one set instead of two of everything. You're going to get one that's going to come out of it. And here's our child combination. If we were to take both the parents, put them together, take and create one selection from each one or the other, whether or not we take them from all from one or one or the other, is our 60-40 split or a 70-30 split. If it's a 50-50 split, it's too predictable. Never 50-50. If we go 95-5, too predictable. This is where the 60-40, 70-30 ratio is coming into. It has to be balanced but not balanced to get the mutation to work. I mean, to get the combinations to work. Because eventually, 3 or 4 generations down the road, we're going to end up with a totally different set. It's going to still be a combination. It's still going to come from the same gene pool, but it's going to be a totally different combination. And this is how some people's noses get bigger, or their teeth get wider, or their foreheads get smaller, or that's how that's how genetics works through generations. Well, that's how the cities are going to work. Some cities are going to go bankrupt because no one's going to pass through them. It's actually kind of interesting how that traveling salesperson solution works. And in the mutation step, here's the numbers here. So chance of 1 in 50 to introduce a mutation in the next generation, so the child, if it replaces a parent or the first parent, we can kind of just like take here and go, well, we can just randomly rotate stuff. And mutation, believe it or not, actually happens in human genetics as well. It's just the random stuff that happens. It's like, oh, you got one of those and one of those. Or it's the weird combinations, and then you get, well, where did that come from? Oh, I don't know, like 20 generations ago we had this gene and it survived and it was still in there, but it wasn't a good one, but it just ended up in the kid, and then the kid has Down syndrome or something, or has some sort of a genetic disposition to something. Which is how medical diseases and problems actually translate through generation and generation, and how we can track that. So, which is the controversial thing, because then if you know you can do that, and you know which one happens, then you can naturally select genes. Then you can prevent everything. But then what you're doing is going back to a 50-50 split, and eventually you're going to have clones of everybody. Everyone's going to look the same. Everyone's going to be the same. Because you've gotten rid of mutation and you've gotten rid of combinations, and you've fixed the genetics so they're identical. So you can have like 5 of me walking around and 5 of you walking around, and we'd all be the same, essentially. There would just be different combinations. So, and anyway, in the U.S., it's kind of like the whole sci-fi kind of thing with, you know, the movie Multiplicity, the movie, you know, just genetically re-engineering your same makeup, just to optimize, or changing it to optimize it. But actually, if you guys see that movie Multiplicity, what that ended up happening is he had a stupid one of him because it got mutated wrong. Then we had a smart, huh? Yeah, I had one with practically every trait. That's actually kind of a good example of mutation, because you can't genetically re-engineer humans to make them identical copies. It doesn't happen that way. So. Huh? Sure. Should there be changes? Unexpected changes. You get that with humans too, actually. And that's how the evolutionary people thought we got intelligent. I don't really buy that, but apparently we were pretty stupid and we mutated to create intelligence in humans. So, well, there's other animals that have mutated throughout the years. If you just look at the cats, I don't own a cat and don't know anything about cats, but from what I hear, they breed the certain types of cats, and now they have different characteristics. Like some don't have hair, and some are really smart, and some are like, it's like the same thing with dogs. They make new characteristics in like short pinchers and big pinchers, and I don't know anything about the breeding of any animal, but don't quote me on anything. But from what I've been watching on Discovery Channel, we've mutated animals throughout the years to come up with all these different exotic breeds of animals. So, anyway, premature convergence. This is what happens when we accidentally, make too many decisions and we converge too much. And we are, talking a lot about mutation. We're talking about convergence. Occasionally, a gene takes over because it's so much more fitter than the others. Then we have a genetic drift, which is what we'll end up having if we have too much 50-50, or we have something taking over too much, which is basically what happened with the blue eyes. The brown eyes genetically shifted over, and nobody has blue eyes, percentage-wise. So, although I think this color of green eyes is kind of rare as well. So if there's a best solution, that may be okay. If not, you may never find the optimal solution if that happens too soon. As a classic example, going back to the people running around the track, if I did a premature convergence of all the people who made it around the track, and I forgot that it was dark outside, and those people that were running around the track were the blind people, then I've prematurely determined that those were the fastest runners. When they're blind, they're going to make terrible soccer players because they can't see the ball. They can't see what's going on around them, although they have prematurely selected them out as being the best runners. So then that would have totally destroyed the entire experiment completely. So it may not be the optimal solution. Large population genetic drift is less likely to happen if we have a larger population pool. We don't select out as much, and using higher mutation rates can combat genetic drift. So we put in some of the slower runners, and we make some of the faster runners slower in terms of our generations or our gene pools. So high levels of randomness are not always helpful as well. because if we just randomly add features to humans, we're going to have some interesting combinations that aren't going to necessarily be very good. So to prevent genetic drifts, you might have several small populations and then crossbreed the individuals from them. Actually, the other thing you might do is have multiple population pools. So if you see a genetic drift on one population, well, the population's gone bad. Throw it away. Take your other sample that you've been doing in parallel and use that one as a better test. In fact, that's what you do essentially in human logic when reasoning. When let's say you want to get a house built, or you get 4 quotes. You want to get a car fixed, you get 3 or 4 quotes. Because a couple of them are going to be together, one of them is going to be bad. So you never take one opinion of anything. Well, why would you do that with your sampling and your mutations either? So you take multiple sets, multiple population sets, and then you pick the one that's going in the right direction in terms of the positive results that you're looking for, or the negative results, depending upon what you're looking for. And you can take the game of life approach. Pretend that individuals live on 2D grid and only allow breeding between the neighbors, a spatial organizational structure. And go, well, then that's kind of the randomness, but it's not random. It's just fixed in terms of its population. Or you can do a slow convergence. So some genetic algorithms will simply fail to converge. They'll fail to actually get the combinations to work together. So similar to the plateau problem of hill climbing, when you plateau at the top of the hill, you need to add noise to the fitness values to make them converge. Put a few oddballs in there, see what happens, which is a way of genetically kind of altering the population. So, schools do this all the time. They call them the students that get bussed in from elsewhere, because they have a population. They don't do this as much as they used to, but around in this area in California, they used to have, if you lived in this neighborhood, you went to that school. If you lived in this neighborhood, you went to that school. So the kids only met the kids that were in the same neighborhood. So certain neighborhoods, it's called segregation, well, it's called desegregation in the school district right now. But certain neighbors, especially in San Jose, you get certain ethnic groups. And then the ethnic groups are stuck in certain populations. And then they go to certain schools. They don't get exposed to everybody else. So what they did is they cross-pollinated. They took and bussed half of these kids over here to this school, and take half of this school and bust them over here, so that you're not segregating. What is that? Well, it builds more intelligence in the group, and it makes better education opportunities and more divergence, more diversity in the group, which is kind of interesting in terms of what it is they're trying to accomplish with the educational system. Because what ended up happening, and to tell you the truth, what ended up happening was that we had spent too much on ESL education in this group. So the kids who could speak English over here spent most of their time learning English. But they already know English. So why waste why waste 2 or 3 years of Johnny's life learning English when he already knows English, when he could be over here learning calculus? Because they're teaching calculus to these kids instead of English to these kids. So you don't get the same, it's not fair. You don't get the same education. So that caused segregation. It'd take all the white kids over here, put them on the school over here, all the imported kids over here, teach them English. And then they don't learn calculus. So it just, in fact, the problem is still going on today, which is really bad. That's why they don't want illegal aliens in California to go to the schools, because it causes a burden on the school district. It's not that we don't want to be nice to them, it's the fact that we have to spend 2 or 3 more years teaching them stuff they don't know because they didn't grow up here. Anyway, long story short, I'm not going to get into that, but that's a political disaster. A lot of politicians blame California school district on immigration, the fact that we're diversified in California. At the lower levels, our schools can't handle the structure. So, solution to that problem, if I were to become political here, would be fix the problem. Make extra programs for those kids so that they can get everything they need, and they can also get what they're supposed to get. So, yeah. All right, so you can also increase elitism to encourage fitter individuals to spread their genes at the risk of premature convergence. Actually, we get the reverse of that here. So, not to keep harping on California, but it seems like the people that don't have money, that can't afford can't afford to send their children to school are the ones who are having more children, which is terrible. It's a thing to say. I'm going to stop with the politics right now, but I spent most of my life in California, so I have the right to criticize. Anyway, that's what it's talking about, encouraging elitism in terms of promoting the gene pool to increase at the risk of premature convergence, which means you're going to overpopulate. So, which is an interesting phenomenon itself. You can ruin the concept if you were to encourage certain populations. In fact, if certain cities, example, this happens actually going back to traveling salesperson. I'm a little slightly off track, but let me get back to traveling salesperson. Cities that put, money into tourism, that encourage people to go to the city, increase the traffic of the city, make it so that the people who live in the city don't want to live in the city anymore. So they take a city that was nice, they encourage people to go there, they increase the population, and then people go away. It's like a yo-yo pattern everywhere. In fact, San Jose actually is on the upswing of the yo-yo. All the money was spent to redevelop the downtown. Still being run. Well, it's not hit its height yet, but pretty soon it's actually going to be a pretty decent place, and then it won't be a good place anymore. So it's kind of interesting. Right now it's a happy medium. It's not too bad right now. Just give it a couple more years and you won't want to be here. So increasing the level of random mutations as well sometimes could help, by randomly changing things. So we have to consider our parameters, last but not least, requiring lots of parameters. So is probably a good idea, including mutation rates, crossover types, population size, fitness scaling policy. The more things, if I were going back to my soccer players, the more characteristics, the more parameters I put in there, the better my end result's going to be. Because I'm going to get people who can run, kick, see, smell, feel. I don't know, maybe I'm looking at head sizes too, because those soccer players hit the ball with their head. So, people with good, strong skulls as well might be a good characteristic. So the more parameters I add, the better. And you can also make use of hierarchies in generic algorithms with a master genetic algorithm set and then parameters for ordinary genetic algorithms. So I can get maybe the A team and the B team out of this, and rather than just randomly selecting the leftovers for the B team, which is actually kind of like what football teams do. They have their rankings, and then they, you can move up and down, but you usually are going to be in one category or the other sometimes. And then parameterless genetic algorithms have default values chosen for parameters, so that humans interaction is not needed for fine-tuning. We're not really considering the population, we're just randomly selecting things that aren't characteristics. That's actually your cities. We're selecting your parameters on your cities by given data that you're given. You're not selecting it from the city. So we have no idea which city is more desirable to go to, which one is going to be more populated. Although the distance says it's 5 miles, it's kind of like if I were to say, if I were going to drive from San Francisco is 7 miles in diameter, by the way. You know how long it takes to drive 7 miles in San Francisco? About 4 times as long as it takes to drive 7 miles in San Jose. So the distance means nothing, essentially, if you're not taking into the parameter or characteristic of how many stops are there, how big are the streets, how windy are the streets, how long does it really take to drive 7 miles? Not that long over here, but anyway. So it takes about a day to walk 7 miles. To go from one end of the city to the other end of the city, to walk it, to jog it, to run it, takes longer than it does over here as well, because of the unevenness of the pattern. So, domain knowledge, which leads kind of to the concept of domain knowledge. Knowing the characteristics of San Francisco versus San Jose as a city gives us our knowledge of our city limitations and our city characteristics. So genetic algorithms do not exploit domain knowledge unless the knowledge engineer designs specific policies and operators. So if I were comparing cities, I could exploit domain knowledge by taking San Francisco and putting it in the same category of, let's say, New York, or actually Austin, Texas is pretty, well, Texas itself has got areas that are pretty popular, so does Colorado, so does other states. And then there are some, like Napa Valley in California, not so populated. In fact, it'll take you 2 seconds to travel 7 miles at 100 miles per hour in a straight line to get through that city. But if you're taking in domain knowledge as a concept, you're making those considerations. And then also during the initialization, there may be a bias towards a certain genotype selected by the domain expert. Well, that's the Hitler phenomena. He thought that Germans were the best. So his bias was everyone who met his criteria for what it is he wanted to do. And you can also use gene-dependent mutation rates and heuristics for crossovers and splits. Well, we have a tendency to be dependent on certain traits as humans as well. And we're dependent on things that are going to make us an ability to live longer for the most part, because we're dependent on survival rate as a gene pool. So cities might be, I don't know, convenience of travel, distance, might be dependent on certain things. We can split them for the dependency. The choice of representation can affect the size and the search efficiency of the problem as well. If you're representing the cities with a lot of data, you're going to be going through a lot more data. It's going to take you longer to traverse through the data. If you're just using distances, very small data set, very small. So the strengths of the, again, I'm getting to the end of this too, the strengths of the genetic algorithms, they do well at avoiding the local minima and can oftentimes find near optimal solutions since the search is not restricted to a small search area. That means you can take a genetic algorithm solution, apply it to the entire nation of populations of anything, and you end up with a larger search space with a faster solution. If you were to apply a regular, traditional computer science algorithm to that, it's going to take way too long and it's going to be impossible to solve the problem. Easy to extend by creating custom operators. Very customizable. You can take it and apply it to traveling salesperson, to soccer players, to anything you want, actually. Human race. Perform well for global optimizations. Yes. Take the same algorithm, the same technique that you're applying to this problem and apply it to something totally different and use it globally. And work required to choose the representations and conversion routines is acceptable. So it's a pretty reasonable amount of work. It's not too complicated, which is how you're going to write a pseudocode for one. It's not that hard to figure out, well, if you think about it, what do you need to do to come up with a problem solution? Weaknesses. Do not take advantage of domain knowledge. We don't consider everything we know about it. We only consider what we want to measure in terms of our parameters. And the fewer number of parameters, the less reliable the solution is. Not very efficient for local optimization or for fine-tuning solutions. It makes mistakes. So it's not a fine-tune, we're going to find the one best soccer player. We're not going to find it this way, but we'll come close. It's approximation. Randomness is inherent, so we put randomness, we put mutations and crossovers in there. Makes it hard to predict solutions. So a solution can take a long time to stumble upon. You're gonna actually, if you actually take a traveling salesperson problem seriously and you actually write and try to figure out if you can calculate it, if you can. It might take you a while to stumble upon, and you're going to stumble upon the correct solution. You're not going to find it as an exact answer, which is what I was alluding to earlier. People who don't like to think out of the box, who like numbers with formulas, with calculations, with direct answers, not going to get it. You're going to accidentally find it doing this technique, so which is more reliable sometimes, actually, and requires an entire population to work. And yeah, it takes lots of time and memory, and may not work well on real-time applications. It doesn't work well for, let's say, for example, GPS programs. Because if it just said, okay, hey, take this route, and then while you're taking it, oh, no, take that route too. The route just kept switching while you were driving. It would drive you crazy. It's kind of like how people, they'll hold the map, they go, oh, no, turn left, no, turn right. Your GPS would throw the GPS out the window. So here's some examples of some systems that are using genetic algorithms. What this slide set around slide 35 is pretty much the end of the basic overview of genetic algorithms. So starting in with slide 36, I'm going to just go through a couple of examples to sort of show you how it's applied. So this system evolve uses existing representation like a neural network actually. The realism is relatively poor. It's not necessarily giving us, it's an evolutionary system. It doesn't necessarily give us a relatively realistic view of the results. It attacks simple tasks, so the attack behaviors do not pose any problem for it, and not found in current archives. It's not available, but it looks at moving from space to space. In fact, there's one for combat kangaroos simulation that's actually pretty popular, and that's out there. It's a simulation that uses a genetic algorithm to breed kangaroos that are good for fighting. Not very realistic, it's just a toy. There's ones that do problem solving for traveling salesperson. There's genetic algorithm examples out there that do game playing, role playing, stuff like that. Actions and parameters. They have limited actions that are needed to look in a direction, to move. We have weights moving left to right, fire, jump, different environmental stimulus that give us sequences. So the sequences can be a simple array of actions and times for the actions to occur. So if you made a simulation of an animal or a being jumping, moving, walking, evolving, so you can put this sort of in a matrix actually to solve the problem. The time offset is relative to the previous action. The absolute time since the start of the sequence can be calculated, and the order is put into array. So there's some random generation for this particular stimulus as well. I'm going to kind of skip through this. The crossover is a simple point crossover. It's predicted. So, and then there's mutation. And what you're looking at, if you look through this, thumb through this, you'll see all of the components that are in this solution. So to come up with a genetic algorithm, you're looking at the base movements for this particular solution. You're looking at the problem space, the sequences, which is the problem spaces. What action is going to lead to another action to another action. And then the randomness that you're going to put in there, random generation, and then the crossover that you're going to put in terms of the solutions, and then the mutation that you're going to apply. And then you're going to have the evolution that's going to come out of it. So if you read through this, I'm not going to go through it anymore, but if you read through this, you'll see the objectives of the defense tactic tool and how the behavior of this computer-generated fighting robot jumping thing actually works. But it's a kind of a toy, dogging, firing, so it's a game. So let's see. So that concludes the, I'm not going to go through the game part of it, but it might be interesting reading. It's not in the textbook, by the way. Neither are genetic algorithms, not in the textbook. Well, a little bit of them are. This material is not in there, though. It comes from a different source. So, all right, I'm going to stop the video. Yeah, actually, hold on, let me stop this here.